Hi and welcome to the video. It's been a while since I've done any filming and it's largely because of lack of time. Here we have my Kyosho 9th scale IC Pathfinder. This is part of a series of cars that were made quite a few years ago. I think that it was around about 1981, and I did have one of these previously and I sold it. And I must admit, it was probably the one thing which I've sold which I always regretted. Anyway, I was fortunate enough last week to spot one of these on eBay, which is on a buy it now. I just paid the full price, no arguments, and went over and got it last Sunday from Kent. I don't think it had been run very much. The fellow who I bought it from, a very nice fellow, evidently he'd only run it twice, and I think he bought it back in 1986. Anyway, I got the car home, checked it over, everything seemed fine, and I put some radio gear in it and it works remarkably well. With these cars, the Achilles heel is very much this gearbox case, which contains the mechanism to allow the car to go backwards and forwards, and the case on this is pretty perfect. Now, with the first one I had, it was fairly cracked when I bought it, and they do crack very easily. So what I did was I preemptively stuck a couple of pieces of steel, and I think that these probably came out of a battery pack similar to the one here, or out of a toy or something, and I actually epoxied these to the sides of the post, because this is the first place where it always cracks, and whilst it might not be the prettiest thing to do, it's better to reinforce it before it breaks than afterwards, because it would be a lot weaker. I've run it a few times this week, and touch wood, I've had no problems whatsoever. I did preemptively order a case from Shapeways, where somebody has been good enough to put together a 3D printed design replacement for both the top and bottom half of the gear case. This is working at the moment, so I'm going to leave it as it is. Now, when the gearbox came, it came fairly dry, so whatever fluid had been put in there had long since dried up. So what I did was I put some Tamiya damper oil in. I think it was just a fairly generic one, and I put it into a depth of about 2mm in the bottom of the tray here, which seems to be working fine. Evidently with the instructions they do say that you shouldn't ever take the gearbox apart. I did do that very carefully, just to try and figure out how the thing works. As far as I can tell, what you've got in here is you've got a shaft going across with a planetary gear system about here, and that is only used to drive the car in reverse. You've got a second shaft going across the back end, and that has got a flywheel arrangement in it, which when the whole gearbox is lifted up and down by this lever, which you'll see there, it causes the drive to either go across this second axle and drive the car forward, and it's variable, so depending on how much pressure you're putting on the gearbox casing inside there, it will cause it to either fully engage or partially engage. And when it's fully disengaged, the drive actually goes through this first axle and via the planetary gear system, which effectively reverses it, and it puts it into reverse. So I'll just explain that. So it's better done when the gearbox is moving, so I'll just keep it moving around, and you'll see with this servo, and I put a 20 gram quite powerful servo on there. If I move it all the way back, you'll see that this belt here starts moving in reverse, and if I push it to the other extreme, it goes the other way. And basically that's how the car goes backwards and forwards. How exactly the flywheel works inside here, I'm not entirely sure. I didn't take the thing entirely apart, but I do know that if you don't put some kind of lubricant in here, it definitely doesn't work. just to go through the features of the car before I start it up and run it. The car's got a differential on the front, differential on the back, and actually you have a differential between the front and the back, with the two wheels at the back backwards, the front wheels go forwards. So it's got differentials all around, which makes the steering really great. Probably not very good for a rock crawling situation, but you wouldn't do that with this car anyway. To be quite honest, it's a bit of a mechanical marvel really that they managed to do this CCVT, which I think means constant velocity transmission of some sort, to actually get that within this small case. When I put the car together, I put it together in 3-channel configuration. So you've got the throttle up here, the steering servo there, and the gear changing one here. And I think I did mention that this is a very high torque servo, and I think that I'm less likely to cause myself strain problems, servo binding, etc. with a powerful one. And it wasn't terribly expensive, and as I said, it's a 20 kilogram servo, so it has got an awful lot of torque. For the radio system, I'm using my DX9 aeroplane transmitter, and this has allowed me to program the end stops into the system, which is much easier than the mechanical setup shown in the instructions, because this car was clearly around long before computer radios of this sort. The way that I got it set up is I have the gear ratio on the left hand stick, which you would normally use the throttle. So down at the bottom here it's going to go in reverse. Round about the middle it actually goes into a neutral. I don't leave it there for very long because the flywheel seems to get incredibly hot, because you've got sort of equal backwards and forwards going on in there, and I don't think it's terribly good for it to leave it there. And if you push it to the top, you're fully engaged into the forward gear. For the receiver, I'm just using a cheap 6-channel orange receiver, which is compatible with the Spectrum DSM-X, and I'm using a battery pack here. What I did find was that I had to insulate all of this quite well, because there is a lot of vibration that goes on with the motor being bolted to the chassis, and the batteries jump out fairly easily. The body which comes with the car is quite nicely detailed. It is Lexan, but it's got a separate front bumper, and on the back you've got this arrangement for a fake spare tyre. This is a lot smaller than the rest of the wheels, so perhaps it could do something bigger, and you've got a separate rear bumper. It was painted quite nicely and it hasn't really sustained any damage. It's attached by the Kyosho system. It's attached by the Kyosho system of body holders, which are quite nice in that they don't have clips. So you've got 2 at the front there in the middle of the bonnet, and you've got 2 here at the rear. This allows you to get the body on quite quickly, because there's nothing more frustrating than starting the car up, putting the body on, and then the engine dies, and then it being a real effort to get the roof off. Right, so the next thing to do is to get it fueled up. I'm using Contest 10 fuel from Model Technics. That seems to be quite a nice fuel in here, so that's 10% nitro. Let's get the cap off. Hold that somewhere. That's all full of fuel. A full tank lasts probably about 6 or 7 minutes, I think. Get the cap on, and we're all pretty well ready to go. take it up to about 1.5 amps. Prime the fuel a little bit.